Hi, I'm Kira. I'm a multidimensional director, and over the past decade, I've worked at the forefront of immersive entertainment and XR, blending storytelling and emerging technology to create experiences that challenge the boundaries of what's possible. I've worked with many leading technology brands and directed on the world's largest volumetric stage. Now it's time to open a space for brilliant minds to share their visions for the future of experiences. Through my eyes, you'll discover unique perspectives that redefine what it means to see beyond reality. Welcome to Portal to the Next Stage. Melissa Painter is a pioneer in the mixed reality space and an expert in embodied intelligence. She is the founder of Breakthru. Breakthru is a platform of immersive well-being experience for the workplace, powered by AI, spatial computing, and our bodies in motion. Backed by Microsoft, Breakthru launched during COVID and is now delivering immersive interactive experiences and microbreaks to people around the world during their workday and school day, in use in over 72 countries and over 45,000 organizations. She's also an award-winning filmmaker, and she's been in multiple labs at Sundance, and that's where I got to know you.
True.
Was through Sundance, where we had our experiences across the hall from each other.
True.
And they were both motion-based, movement-based dance experiences, also using virtual reality. And it was so nice to have a kindred spirit.
Yes.
So
Yes.
close. So that was really special. And while I was doing this dance experience with my co-creator, Reggie Watts, you had this beautiful experience that really connected us almost back to our breath and to nature and movement. And I felt very calm, which is a unique feeling to get to have during a major film festival. So thank you for that.
And for us, your experience was quite joyous every time we dipped into it. So it was a good compliment. Yes.
I'm glad that joy was the key word. That was the key piece that we had going into it, was to create a sense of joy.
Nice. A design principle.
Exactly.
Like
Hopefully it comes through at the end when you finish the product.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
So I really want to talk to you about Breakthru and what you've learned from building this experience. I think it's amazing that you've come from this creative journey, this place of narrative and understanding technology in a way to move bodies, but you've also done this incredible work with Microsoft. And what has it been like coming from a creative place to then work with such a large company?
There's two answers to that. The working with a large company side of it, I had always done a little bit of every time I was working in immersive technology. Similarly to you, I mean, there's always been some form of strategic partnership or a new headset that someone wants demo content for, or an allegiance with a lab or some researchers. I think for me, every time we have those kinds of relationships with the people who are building the hardware or designing the software that we're building on top of, it's actually quite generative and interesting and creative, if that makes sense. I've always liked the challenge of designing sort of at the edge of something that was still under construction. Microsoft, in this particular arena, they were familiar with the immersive work we'd been doing around break taking at work, and the piece that you saw at Sundance that was very much about what does it take to motivate people to move, and how can you use sort of real-time feedback to take them both physically but also hopefully mentally through a guided experience in a way that will be impactful. And they had seen all of that. In fact, by the time we went to Sundance, I think it was actually on Windows Mixed Reality.
Wow.
When COVID happened, it was a surprise when the Teams team came to us and said, we're seeing a tremendous rise in this need for virtual work tools, and it's in tandem with a tremendous rise in stress around the world and overwork around the world.
So they could see a correlation between those things at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, we were actually, this sounds startup speak, but I mean, it was technically a pivot because we productized an evolution of the concept that you'd encountered at Sundance. And so, and the original goal with it was to launch it in the context of places, similarly to you, but part of it was on corporate campuses, which obviously was not going to happen at the beginning of COVID, but they were familiar with that work.
Mm.
And for me, as someone who has always been a reluctant technologist and really was drawn to immersive specifically because it felt like it was a time that we had the opportunity to get back to our bodies in relationship with technology. At first, it was a daunting idea to even get back into a rectangle. I mean, just to be honest. And we gave
because you'd been so spatial.
Yeah.
Everything else was moving the body through three-dimensional space.
Yeah, and giving people three-dimensional real-time feedback. And I think we were just talking about design principles and yours of joy in the piece, the dance piece with Reggie. And for us as a studio, we had design principles, and basically all of them touched back to things that you could accomplish in immersive interactive space. We didn't want to put Breakthru in teams unless we could hit those same design principles. And then we felt like we did once we built an MVP. So that was a long way of saying that was an on-ramp to us to what's turned into a really surprisingly large global audience. And that piece is deeply satisfying, but also sad because it's reflective of the fact that around the world, people are feeling trapped by their day-to-day relationship with their technology and can tell that they need to move more.
Is it trapped in the philosophical relationship with technology, or do we feel trapped by we're bound to our devices? I mean, I'm even thinking now, like, I want to free myself. Like, I'm going to move this over here. I'm just going to take this away. Is it that we are feeling trapped by the constant loop of the connection to the technology? Where does the trap happen? Does it happen in the two-dimensional screen?
I think for those of us who are lucky enough to have a significant creative aspect to our day-to-day lives and our practice, whatever it is that we've chosen, whether it's innovation or creativity, it's hard to sometimes imagine your way into the lived experience of so many people around the world. The percentage of people around the world who are sitting for hours upon hours upon hours expected to do task-based work in association with computers that are measuring them, that are timing them, that are feeding them information is so much larger than I ever fathomed before we encountered this group of people who respond to our product. And so I have all sorts of philosophical feelings about how we're all trapped in the way technology has defined time for us, the fact that it asks for us to learn in a way that's not natively human. I mean, all these things that I believe are sort of theoretically wrong about it, but just on a very physical level, we're killing ourselves from sitting still. And so, I mean, literally trapped.
Wow. That's a big statement there. We're killing ourselves. We're actually causing ourselves damage by not moving during the day.
Beyond. I mean, we had always been science-backed in our work and our research, et cetera. But as we went deeper in this, I mean, if you're a woman and you sit persistently for 6 to 8 hours a day, does not matter if you ran a marathon before work, if you're going to go hiking with your kids after work, if you're the youngest, healthiest person on the planet, it's that static behavior that is literally causing you to up your chance of an early death by 37%, which sounds like, it's so extreme, it's hard to fathom, but it's because our body was designed to move. And when you sit still, you turn your metabolism off. And when women turn their metabolisms off for whatever reason, and of course, there's never enough scientific research into women, hormonal systems, et cetera, but it's worse for women than for men. But for men, they're upping their chance of an early death by 18%.
Wow.
So this whole—
more than double for women.
Yeah. Yeah. And weirdly, you also get women sort of more committed to churning through stuff. It's hard to describe. We look at our user base and our population, and the number of women I've interviewed have said, I literally never took a break. I never took a lunch break. I never took a break. It took me a long time to realize that I must have space for 2-minute breaks. I mean, it's this sort of drive to be there for others, to power through all of these things, to multitask, all these things that we've trained ourselves to do that are hurting ourselves under these circumstances.
Oh, that's what I love about the language that you use. You calling it a micro break.
Yes.
It seems so small, like it's possible to take. We can step away. We don't have to keep powering through. It's just a micro break. It's not a break.
Well, no, and that's the piece. But you know this from immersive. I mean, I think I used to make traditional films, like full-length feature films, which I do believe. I mean, I've always believed that film is a deeply immersive medium from an experiential standpoint. But the passage of time it takes for a film to work on you versus what can happen in the space of an interactive immersive experience. I mean, the numbers of times I put a headset on someone and they completely lose track of linear time. And they come back out and cannot believe 2 minutes have passed, 5 minutes have passed. And, you know, we all know that you can stretch time, that you can bend time, that time is not experientially linear. But everything in our environment, especially our tech, is always telling us it's linear. Immersive breaks that. And so that was always one of the things that really drew me to the medium. Part of what it proves is that these small moments, if you can get people to focus in a multisensory way, can become very expansive. I'm sure you've had exactly the same experience.
Definitely, where you can't even track time. So you don't know whether you've been in there for an hour or a minute.
Yeah.
Like it starts to feel elastic.
Exactly. Which any athlete will label flow state. You know, any musician will say the same. An academic will talk about going deep in their thought process or whatever, right? Like, you know, people holding a baby are going to have the same experience. Like we've all had some experience in our life where we know that these moments can slow down, but we make so little space for them right now.
And so little space for movement, I think, as well. I think that there's something about this bind in our bodies and the attachment to, you know, be on the Zoom call, be on the Microsoft Teams call, be in this two-dimensional screen and just keep going. Or I think about, you know, when I'm running between buildings in New York, I'm in a very linear path. I'm not thinking about moving in other ways that challenge my body, that give me more flexibility if I were to move my body more laterally instead of just going forward. All these other things that, you know, the dimensionality of how our bodies should move, I think we lose.
There's a huge piece of that as well, which is part of why it's so fun to design movement-based experiences that shake that up for people, because it's true. I think the average six years old is the sort of peak of range of motion for most Americans. And the truth is that you can maintain a lot of that embodied range of motion across a lifetime if you just use it. But the other thing about that, and you were talking about tiny, I love that part, that 2 minutes in motion, you know, 5 deep breaths, like mechanically, those things can turn our body back on, which just means that our body is magic, just flat out magic. But the other thing is our body changes all the time and improves all the time. And one of the things that we were very mindful of stepping into designing Breakthru is there's a sea of misinformation out there and sort of misunderstood perceptions about embodiment, about well-being in our culture. And they make you think things like, you know, it's going to take half your day to change whether you're having a healthy experience. And I mean, it's not, or it's going to cost this certain amount, or you need this trainer, or you need this smoothie. There's a myth of it being something that's very transactional, that takes a lot of things that most people don't have. And it's actually not true. If we just let our body do what it was originally designed to do, we'd all be way better off.
That's powerful. You don't need a lot of technology. You don't need the latest yoga gear and perfect outfit. You can just do some movement, and that will already reconnect you to your body's power, your innate power.
When Nike first sort of brought back jogging or introduced running to the American population, which, I mean, we've had so many funny movement trends across generations. Hula hoops is one of my most favorite. But there's that idea, I mean, people really fell into the beauty of that idea, that it's just you moving. You could do it anywhere. There is no finish line, just go. And it's a little bit, for us, there's another side of Breakthru, which is that we have a real cultural cleavage between competitive movement, creative movement, between an expert mover and a non-expert mover.
Mm-hmm.
And we really, really, really cordon people off. I mean, to me, when I think about your work, it's very similar to saying, oh, audience over here, performers over here. That is not the way that movement and culture and music and theater ever used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And people made them themselves
Right. They
with each other.
separated us.
Yeah.
They made a divide.
Yeah.
Whereas really there's an incredible power in bringing those things more closely together, the experts and the novices, the professionals and the audience.
It's essential, and it is much more the way it was for centuries and centuries and centuries. And it's really, one could argue, the industrialization of media and culture that made that shift.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a long segue, but I've always admired that in your work. And I think it's something that we share in common, that, again, about immersive, one of our design principles was that the user should always be the last creator, that you should never make anything that did not protect their imagination and give them the chance to be a creator in the moment of interacting. And it was actually when we realized that we could maintain a teeny bit of that essence, even in our Teams app, that we said, okay, let's do it.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I would love to hear more about that, what you're finding with your user base, if they're finding that they're able to feel themselves become creative. And I would love to talk a little bit about some of the dance inspiration and movement.
Yeah.
I know you've worked with some professional dance companies, and I'm curious to hear about the influence of their movement styles on the Breakthru app.
Yeah, on the movement vocabulary piece and movers in general, one of the things that we've been so blessed by is that the people that are our movement makers or movement designers have enormous brain trusts and body of work. So in the case of dance, working most recently with Mark Morris and his company, and I mean, I saw Mark dance the first time when I was in high school. And one of the things he's always been legendary for is bringing beauty to pedestrian movement. So how to take these motions that we all do every day and just take them a step further. But his original training was in folk dancing. So there's always the sense of dancing for each other, his dancers. I mean, there's so many circles in his work. And so there were those allegiances already, but then he also has taken dance into many different kinds of communities at this point for well-being. I mean, there's his dance for PD, working with Parkinson's patients, is global at this point. So the point is that we've sought out movers. It's not like, oh, that pirouette is pretty, let's try to work with that person. It is, how does this person think about embodied experience and what do they know about teaching it? And then we also work with people that come from blended, one yoga teacher, but he's got, I think, 4 black belts and he's close to 70. And so people that have very, very long lives lived in experimentation in body knowledge. So that is what we're looking for on that side. In terms of the creative piece of it, when someone interacts with Breakthru, you're never stepping into the same river twice, because there's always a feedback loop between the movement of your own body and what you're seeing. And it's both visual, but it's also auditory. So your body becomes an instrument in the experience, and the sound is changing based on your own motion. It is so subliminal, the audio piece. The visual is a little bit more apparent, but people constantly, and I'm trying to train myself to not use the word user, though I live in a universe where that's where many things get measured by. But we have movers, and what they say to us is the first door for them into being willing to experience it, wasn't, I wanted my abs to look different, or even that I wanted my balance to be better, but that they wanted the moment of beauty or surprise or color or the bird call. Again, back to culture over time. I mean, things like haiku, so many moments of art, those things were meant to be momentary moments of immersion. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think that's a piece of what we're attempting to deliver as well. And people do feel that. They really do. I mean, they also just feel, I hate to say it, but decent design, good interaction design, good design, period, because
Mhm.
there's really little of it out there in the arena
Mm.
that we're in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a category that you feel that you fall into right now? Can you put yourself in one, or do you feel like it's straddling across different categories?
We've gone spatial again, so some of we now are at room scale again in some places, and with projection though,
I
not
was
in
going to say they're
headset.
projecting onto walls
Yeah,
and
and
sort
it's
of.
interactive, and so it's still the body tracking, etc. So it's this is a segue, but I mean it's funny. I'm not missing being in headset. I really have to
Mm.
say that, though I'm also not in them a lot right now, so
Mhm.
I'm not thinking about what I could be missing. Um, I bring up the spatial thing because Breakthru is experience design, and it's delivering interactive, embodied well-being experiences. But when I think about what it means in the context of your workday, I'm not trying to replace an app I'm like, okay, you could have a Coca-Cola or
Mhm.
you could have a Breakthru.
Hmm.
If you were at the office, you could have a laugh with a colleague, which I would say do that first,
Mhm.
or you could have a Breakthru, right?
Hmm.
So to me, we're that. We're part of the furniture. We're part of the landscape architecture. We're
Mhm.
part of the digital toolkit. It's not,
You're part of the decor, you're part of the
yeah,
atmosphere. So you're taking, just to explain to the audience, essentially in some offices, you're taking over a pedestrian office space and transforming it with projection into a space where they can have a breakthrough,
yeah,
move their body,
yeah,
recenter their breath,
yeah.
and then return to their daily workday.
Yeah, or you might be a nurse and you've got just a minute and you are going to go sit on a stool in the break room, close the door, and do a
Mm.
breathing break on your phone.
Mhm.
So it's the full spectrum
Mhm.
in terms of opportunity. But because of that, I don't really contextualize this in the relationship. I think immersive makers think more this way than people who come out of traditional digital product design. I mean, we've all been multi-platform since day one because the platforms were always changing.
Changing.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. And one tech ends and a new one begins. And
yeah.
so you're also just sort of finding a way to move the story and the experience from one to the next.
And I'm sure you find this too. I mean, I've been asking the same questions and making the same thing for a good 10 years now.
Mhm.
And someone like you could look at my work and find the thread, and most other people might not. But I mean, I know what I've been doing, and we've been asking the same question and doing the same thing. It's just showed up in a very divergent kinds of ways.
Exactly. But what's so important about it is it's so needed right now. I think what's great is there are these places where we can design these experiences and these galleries and museums and these wonderful film festivals, but now you're able to transition it and take it directly to people, and it has an impact on their daily life.
I think for me, that was the impetus to get into immersive, though it sounds odd because at the time that I did, immersive was so rare. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, you want daily impact and you're going to design for something where it's the HoloLens and four people are going to be able to try it. I mean, where is the logic there? But to me, when I left filmmaking, my goal was to become a useful part of people's daily lives against very concrete problems.
Mhm.
And the problem set I was curious about was, what are we cutting off about our intelligence when we are literally turning off a significant portion of it for the time of the day where we think we're thinking hard? So,
Talk to me about the usage in schools. I'm really curious about what happens when children are forced to sit behind desks for so many hours
oh,
and they lose their recess and their time of
I mean, it's
play.
it's so catastrophic. It's hard to speak about without just being livid because it's also so counterintuitive. This whole myth that kids are meant to sit still, that any of us are meant to sit still to think hard, is an outrageous lie, probably invented by the people who invented the machines that had to sit still for us
Mm.
to use them. And for children in particular, and there may be a gender split too. I mean, I think it's perhaps one could argue harder for young boys. It's damaging, deeply, deeply damaging to limit the amount of free play time. And that's not just for physical development. I mean, again, I hate to swim in the stats, but I read this stuff all the time. And I mean, children today in the United States are something like 50% off achievement on the presidential fitness test from the 80s. I mean, that's not a small shift. But worse, they're showing up as 5-year-olds to school with no vestibular sense. They literally can't balance. And the reason is they've never been allowed to spin on a swing. And they've never been allowed to climb a tree. I mean, all these things that kids will just normally do, wind themselves up like a top. I mean, that has a physical purpose. It's so you develop a balance skill. So there's the piece about how are we breaking their bodies, which is really upsetting in and of itself. But I think in my mind, a differentiator between the work that we're trying to focus on and thinking other people are doing about ergonomics or physical therapy or whatever is that we're trying to raise up the fact that you're greatly impairing your cognitive ability when you don't have these movement moments in the flow of your school day or work day. For children, when we've been free to schools when we launched, and that's like preschools in Poland through Harvard, though every now and then the Harvard part makes me grouchy. But I think that the point is, and that's like 20% of our usage globally, so there's a lot of interest in it. What we hear from teachers with younger children is it takes that shaking it off, getting the wiggles out moment for kids to be able to focus, but that also having a tool that's essentially, because when you take a breakthrough break, you're choosing the mood you want to feel at the end of it, and having a moment for kids to just check in emotionally, social and emotional learning, blah, 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 has another component of it.
Fascinating. And a little scary.
But before we even started recording, you were talking about what this moment in time is actually like, and we haven't even touched on AI. I mean,
we're going to get there.
Well, and I just feel like anyone with any common sense right now, you just have to look at the wreckage that technology has wrought and say, come on. I mean, I have no longer a teenage son. I mean, he's in his 20s, and he openly wishes for the day that the whole grid just goes down. At which point I have to remind him he better hope that's after his college tuition is paid for. But I mean, it's just, I think that I hope people are waking up.
It's so interesting because I see technology in so many ways. It's such a powerful tool for us. And let's talk about AI. Let's get into AI. It can help us in so many ways. It can make certain processes more efficient so that we perhaps could get to the walk outside and finish our day a little bit sooner or spend more time with our families. There are positives, but at the same time, if we're bound to it and we don't design it well as human beings, if we don't keep the human-centered design approach, then we're living for the technology.
I do think that it's tantalizing to say things like AI has the potential to help us avoid task-based work that is a hindrance to us being able to focus, and do the more meaningful stuff, or it's going to give us more time back in our day. I feel like I'm in it, around it all the time right now, working with major corporations who are trying to manage the human change management and the learning and all these other things that have to go with it to actually make it effective, leaving aside all the privacy and security and all that other stuff. And I just don't see it. I don't see it. I think it's a myth. And that's not to say that we can't get there, but to imagine it's going to be painless or swift, or that it's going to treat all people equal is I would, it's an illusion.
We already know it's not treating people
really
equally,
not. Yeah.
And it has a long way to go.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's so many, so that's a piece of it. But I'm curious how you feel as a maker, because I also am married to a novelist. So many of our friends are artists. I mean, the musicians. My husband likes to say that writing is thinking, and it's true. the minute you shortcut the pain of that process for any child, they're not learning how to think. So people who don't live a creative process daily tend to really discount, why is it painful? Why does it take a long time?
Right.
Why is there a process? Why do you get totally mentally blocked and then have to go for a walk? I mean, it is for a reason. That is part of the human lived experience.
It's part of the process, definitely.
Yes. And also, what about the collaborative piece? I mean, look at what you do. I mean, you guys are building with each other's minds. I mean, that's just...
And we've been building in VR. And in fact, during the pandemic, I almost think it brought our team closer.
Interesting.
Because we were working with each other in virtual space. And we were designing these worlds. This is where we built our show, Finding Pandora X.
Yeah.
And we were able to meet more regularly in virtual space than we had before, and really look at the perspective of the world.
Yep.
Or rather, look at the world from different perspectives. So I remember a very significant moment for me was meeting with one of my lead developers and flying up to this cloud that we built and looking down on the world and going, like, we need to recenter things, and we need more, like, I could see the world better from being inside the experience, but having that real-time connection with him in virtual space. And it's process.
It's process. I was just going to say.
There's no way we could have shortcut that.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly, what I have found. And maybe it's because we make in media that are where you can't have everything that you're looking for all the time, right? Or that's complex or new. But so often those creative insights come in those moments of problem solving, right? And again, if you just make that part of it go faster, I don't know what you've gained. So also, I mean, I have a real issue with people's work not being respected, and the IP of their work not being respected.
Certainly. Yes, for so many artists.
Yeah.
That is, and one of the things that I would like to see happen is some way to understand what was made with AI versus what isn't.
I mean, people are obviously talking about labeling all of those things, but I think it's still really a slippery slope, because the minute that you have style transfer I don't know what to say. I'm skeptical.
It needs a lot of design help.
Yes.
And I think it needs the right minds in the room that are thinking about all of these aspects and what it's going to take for us to get there, because it's moving at such a clip right now. And I don't know that enough guardrails are being put in place.
I don't think so. I mean, and I think that we all could probably look at the ebbs and flows of the metaverse and immersive. And I certainly, as someone who was standing very close to some large tech companies during those times, not inside them, but as an adjacency, would argue that they didn't do that either. I mean, I think some of these opportunities or tools fell by the wayside because there was not a thoughtfulness from a design standpoint.
It's just a rush to the immediacy. So does that then parallel back to the focus on a day, 8-hour day in the office, do as much as you can, power through, don't take a break, just don't worry about the design or the thoughtfulness, just keep going?
I think it gets back to I think it's similar. I mean, to me, with the immersive stuff, it was always the race to the hardware, right? But without the thinking through, frequently designing the interactive capabilities of the hardware due to the limitations of the hardware, not to what humans would want to do with it, if that makes sense.
Certainly.
I've never understood, and I think that so much of the content that we see in immersive, that's still totally the case. I mean, it's like, make it this way, have the avatar look this way. I mean, it's all accommodating the capabilities of the tech today, not what they should be, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think my feeling about AI is that we're already seeing a similar path. Find the use cases that will fit what it's capable of today, which is way less than
opposed to here are the types of experiences we want to design. Here's how we know it can be impactful on human beings. Let's make the tech for that purpose.
Yeah. Right. Or let's go talk to the people who actually know that use case or live that it's again, technologists tend to be infamous for having too much hubris.
I want to talk about since so many people all over the world do have a daily workday, and so I'm curious about what role these micro breaks and the breakthroughs have in maintaining focus and productivity. What have you seen from that?
So we see from a quantitative standpoint in our user base stuff that indicates that people are reaching for it during the places in the day where you would normally be dipping from
Mm.
like a metabolism standpoint. And so there's a reason that people used to take siestas at 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon. It's also when we're frequently, as coffee drinkers, are going for a second coffee,
It's
etc.
related to our circadian
Yeah,
rhythm,
it
isn't it, as
absolutely
well, right?
is.
And
Yeah.
we're like all a little out of sync quite often with
Yeah.
our circadian rhythm.
Yes, exactly right. And so by way of example, we see that it's a tool that people are reaching for in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
We also see, and so as an energy management tool during the flow of the day. And I think that reminder that time management is all well and good, but I mean, a lot of the onus on us as individual contributors is how are we able to manage our emotions during the day?
Mm-hmm.
Some employees use their mood as a resource during the day, which seems counterintuitive, but put yourself in the shoes of a call center worker or a nurse or any person on the front line interacting with strangers, trying to help them through the flow of their day, how you feel about how that last call went, about what's going on for you at home, about what you're doing that evening. I mean, all of those things have a very concrete impact on your ability to show up for the next moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so people using it to tune their moods in relation to those kinds of flows. I mean, I get emails from people saying, I did confident today before my big presentation, and it gave them what they needed to stand in their own strength, their body, and show up and do the next thing. So I would argue that those are all significant impacts on productivity.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing, I mean, people are searching around the world, Googling, how do they keep focus during the workplace? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's, it comes along with the technology conversation we were just having, but we know that being able to maintain attention, being able to do deep work versus getting distracted, we all know, when are those windows for ourselves personally? Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? What does it take for you to really be able to hone your focus? And hearing from people that Breakthru is a tool that they're using in that moment is incredibly satisfying to hear. It's the best when it comes from, an engineer at SAP who starts the sentence by saying, I started using Breakthru so my neck wouldn't hurt at the end of the day.
Mm.
And now I find myself using it because it keeps the code from swimming on my computer in the afternoon. And so I think there's that thing about you have to give people a way in that's the most hitting their biggest need,
Mm-hmm.
but then hopefully you're delivering an added kind of value along the way. But one of the things that I've learned that's fascinating as you think about a quantification like productivity is we have no good way to measure it.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
How does it even get measured?
Well, again, because we talk to a lot of academics who study these things, and apparently there was one point in time where Microsoft used to measure productivity by number of lines of code written. At which point there's a myth, but maybe it's true, that someone literally shipped all of the code for Flight Simulator inside Excel. At which point Microsoft realized perhaps we shouldn't be measuring it that way, because isn't one
Wow.
elegant line better than 8,000 that were unneeded?
That right, that don't actually
Yeah.
get you anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's the same as a novelist, right? As your partner,
Yeah.
maybe just writing, go ahead and write 100 pages. But if you write 10 meaningful pages, that's worth so much more.
Right. Or do the Hemingway thing and write the 100 and then get it down to the 10. And the 10 are going to be what they are because you're scaffolded on top of all of the other work that you did. So it's, but let's also be clear. There are people around the world whose work is literally being measured down to the minute, and they're being counted in every single way. And I think I just sort of willfully ignored that information before I was running this company. And now it's in my face, and it's just so appalling. I wouldn't put that life on anyone. And I think the thing is, too, that we have to remember that when we're in those kinds of loops where we're being so micromanaged and so measured, it's hard to even take a breath to realize what's going on. You're
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
on
You're
a
just in a
hamster
loop.
wheel.
Is it possible to get something like Breakthru into some of those factories to change the lives of those people?
We are, and I get emails back that just literally where people say, this is changing my life. And I mean, I'm not taking like, this is changing my life. But when someone says to me that I'm in a windowless space, you know, I used to dance when I was young, I haven't moved since, and now my balance is getting better again. I'm like, okay. I mean, one of the lovely things for Breakthru is a lot of people who think they're in the well-being space could care less about the person living that life. And so for us, we have a deep desire to design in a way that's very democratic, very accessible, and that can reach into those places where, you know, some of the other well-being initiatives might not be looking.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a dream of places you would like to see it enter?
I just can't get over all the weird places we've landed, to be frank. I mean, we're in over 45,000 organizations, and every now and then I'll just be like, oh, you know, I wonder if Amtrak, or what about Gucci, or what about, or, you know, the Detroit Zoo. I'm like, okay, the Detroit Zoo. I mean, that made me happy. I have a desperate desire to see a zookeeper doing Breakthru in the context of some of those animals. So
yes, I would love to see if the animals want to mirror the zookeepers as well, because probably there's a shared movement there.
People, I mean, back to children, and we were talking about this earlier, but I also have interviewed so many professional athletes, and people's envisioning of movement and embodiment of movement. And I mean, Kobe Bryant was famous for that, right? It's people dream themselves into the movement vocabulary. Yes, of animals. Yes, of other athletes. Yes, of dancers, etc. And that's a really interesting thing.
Performers use it all the time. Yes, you look at what was Margot Robbie talking about with her portrayal of Barbie, and she tapped into some animal components.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, again, back to what we're built to do. That's something we're built to do. We're built to mirror a movement that we see in the world. But as for where we want to land that we haven't, I mean, I just want to be everywhere. Total world domination.
If you had like 3 wish list places, where would they be?
We've ended up seeing use in the Red Cross in Kiev. I mean, we've just, it's like we've showed up in places where, you know, whoever's grabbing for it really needs that in that moment. And you're just so grateful. So I don't have, I mean, we love some of the corporations we're collaborating with, like Kaiser, for example. I mean, that to me is a win because they're going to give us runway and space, and they have the desire to see this idea innovate. And so when I think about where do I wish for those companies that can enable the product getting better for everyone else.
Absolutely. A place where it can continue to innovate and evolve.
Exactly. All right. Is it my turn now?
You can ask me your question. Sure.
I want to ask you and see if you can remember back to some moments for you early on in immersive where you just stood in an experience and you knew you were going to commit time and energy to that medium. Does that make sense?
With the first moment I put on a headset, it was instantaneous.
Yeah.
I'd been writing for it and dreaming about it for years prior.
Yeah.
I've had this idea, because I was working on a documentary film about this wonderful theorist and philosopher and athlete and medical doctor, Dr. Irving Dardick, who looked at nature as made of waves. Yeah. And the only way that I could picture it was dimensionally. And I felt very trapped in a 90-minute linear documentary. Yeah. And so I kept, trying. I'm not a great illustrator, so that's never been my gift. But I kept trying to illustrate in boards, in diagrams, like writing in a linear format, whatever I could to try to show how we might be able to move through the way that he sees the world. Yeah. So I felt very motivated to do that for his story, but I think it's just how my brain has always worked. Yeah. When I saw The Enemy at Tribeca, and I wish I'd been to Sundance years prior to have seen Nani's Hunger in LA or any of these incredible works that were being done by Nani and Chris Milk. But the time that I came to it was The Enemy, which was this beautiful piece by Ben Karim Khalifa where he had done photogrammetry of these two soldiers, a Palestinian soldier and an Israeli soldier, and you physically had to move your body between the two soldiers. And that was it. It was a light bulb for me. It was everything that I had been dreaming of and wanted in technology. And I almost didn't get to do the headset. I was one of the last people. I'd actually given it to a colleague and given my ticket up for him.
Yeah.
And I was so grateful. Like, I came back to the team. They put me on the list. Like, I had to go back to Tribeca days and days after. And I sat on the floor with Ben and I said, what do I need to learn?
Yeah.
And it was everything for me. And I've never looked back.
Yeah.
And the piece that's funny to me now is from my years of theater making and living in the theater world, now I'm returning to that physical space more, but taking everything that I've learned from going so deep into the immersive metaverse, virtual, XR, mixed reality spaces.
Yeah. It's interesting. I ask because I feel like everyone that I know and admire in the space has some sort of moment like that. That's almost a moment. It's a light bulb moment. It's a moment of conversion. It's a moment where these things align. But I think that idea that you're seeing something that you've known all along we needed.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really...
I just wish I'd put a headset on sooner or moved with an iPad in a dimensional way. I just didn't know what the language was. And I feel like I had all these very clunky conversations with these wonderful film festivals going, you know, and other film organizations that were very linear and wonderful. They're still telling incredibly impactful stories.
Yeah.
That's just not my calling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, that's always been one of the, not the curiosities, but one of the things that I felt sad about with immersive early on is you would have these opportunities to go to a place like a Sundance or a Tribeca and have an experience that was more than mind altering. And yet you knew that what was being fed to most people who could get into a headset was very traditional and in many ways linear experiences, very suppressing of an imagination, not taking embodiment into consideration, all about thumbs and not about movement. And I just felt like this is a moment, like everyone should see the potential of these tools because that is how we're going to learn what to do with them that's useful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I've been working with this incredible dance company, Kinetic Light, that they're all these disabled dancers. And they've been opening my worldview up more and more to accessibility design and these aesthetics for accessible design. And I've been meeting so many new people and thinking more about what is that experience? What can that be? And again, I feel like immersive just has an infinite amount of possibilities and reaching and designing in ways that traditional media has not been designed so far. And I think, and we see people innovating, adding different types of closed captions, but there's just a layer of the immersive and connecting more to our senses.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that that's just really important. So
it's everything.
And it's a way that we can all experience more deeply.
And it's something that's really different about us than AI in terms of the kind of intelligence that we have and that we can develop across a lifetime. So
yes.
Agreed.
I think that's important that we keep thinking about is what is that differentiation between humanity and AI? What is it about the human experience versus the artificial experience? Because I think we're going to need to think to understand more about what makes us different. So it's very cool. Like, I love using some of the tools. I use them in parts of process. We have not replaced any human beings on our design team. And I do think that the deep work still comes from deep thinking and it takes time.
Yeah.
But I do feel like we need to remember what is human and connect more deeply to some of our senses than we have been.
Yeah. And we have more than 5 senses. So, and we really need to move to activate a bunch of them. I mean, I hope there's a growing cultural awareness about that kind of embodied intelligence. Annie Murphy Paul's book is beautiful if you haven't read it, The Extended Mind. But she delves not just into embodied intelligence, but also thinking with spaces, thinking with others, all of these ways in which the human brain is is not a computer. It's more like a magpie, or it's, I mean,
Wow.
and it's fascinating.
Right. And even just the way the human brain functions, right? There's so much there to study and learn about.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we encounter sometimes when we hit a more skeptical audience talking about the role of the body at the workplace. I mean, it's easy because you can point at just the concrete physical benefit, but the cognitive benefit sometimes takes people a moment longer to even be willing to absorb. And yet, there's not a person that you look at, a room full of IT people, and say, have you ever, gone for a walk and had a good idea, who hasn't had that lived experience and that idea of, thinking in motion, the mind in motion, all of those things. People do have lived experience if you start reminding them about it. But I also, again, tech loves to measure everything. It loves to measure the stuff it can measure and then tell us that that's the important stuff. But things like having a sense of balance, having a sense of proprioception, having a sense of interoception, all of those things actually contribute greatly to decision-making abilities, to cognitive abilities, et cetera.
And those come from movement.
They come from movement and being able to listen to your own body. So there's two great studies in Annie's book, and neither of which, I mean, she's a science journalist, not a scientist, but one is looking at stock traders who, don't have their Harvard MBA, but just go with their gut and always make the right choice. And when you start to look biologically at the difference maker in those people, it's that they have a stronger interoceptive sense. And the truth is, our body, from an absorbing information standpoint, we can cognitively just absorb a tiny bit of what our senses are actually seeing, et cetera. And so if you're more able to listen, is my heartbeat starting to race? What's going on? All of those kinds of things through interoception, you're going to see those patterns sooner than someone who doesn't have that.
It's like I want to listen to my heartbeat now, as you even just say, like, where is it at right now? To just take a moment to check in with it because I haven't today.
Yeah. But some people can't even feel their own heart or hear I mean, anyone could, but you do have to have moments in your life where you learn to practice those things. Proprioception is just good for safety. If you don't know where you stop and start, it can be. Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things in VR, to design for that and to take that into consideration. It's a space where you get to think about it.
I mean, back to VR as like a design mechanism, for us, one of the biggest unlocks in thinking about these embodied microbreaks was to build them first in VR and think about what does it take to remind people that their body can change. And so many people in the course of their lifetime feel trapped in whatever their current physicality is. And it's so easy to just sit there and not feel good about it and dig yourself a deeper hole, if you will. And it was VR that really gave us moments where we felt like, oh, you can change scale completely. Oh, you know what I mean? You can have this capability that you wouldn't. And that did shift things for people.
It also takes us back to these principles of wonder and awe.
Yeah.
My colleague Caitlin Krause has been writing about these, and it definitely, VR gives us that perspective shift capability.
Yeah.
Okay, Melissa, this is called the lightning round. Are you ready?
Ready.
You can use your body if you want to.
Okay.
Okay. Sky or terrain?
Sky.
Earth, wind, fire?
Water.
Force, time, shadow, light?
Light.
Augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality?
Augmented.
The most embodied moment that you had in VR?
Wasn't in headset, and it wasn't VR. It was actually a Chris Milk piece that was at Sundance when we were there with Heroes. And it was the bird piece, and it was the final mirror, embodying a bird.
Beautiful. If you could invite one person from the past to put on a VR headset, who would it be?
Oh, that's a hard one. It's funny because so many of the figures that I most admire, I think, wouldn't have needed it. I mean, like you could reach back to spiritual leaders, and I think
Mm-hmm.
they don't need it. I think they already had that sense of witness mind and space and ability to shift perspective, etc. I would put some silent filmmakers in it. I think that the early silent filmmakers who encountered a brand new media had a way of thinking about making with a new thing. What's your answer to that question?
I wish I'd put Agnes Varda in a headset. I had the
Did she
chance.
never get in a headset?
Maybe she did. I had the chance to meet her, and I wish I'd had one with me in Paris.
Yeah, she's one of my all-time most, I mean, to me, when I say films are one of the most immersive mediums, it's Vagabond would be at one of the top of the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. She lived her medium.
Beautifully.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I've always wanted to be able to swim underwater for as long as I like. So I think that, yeah.
Have you ever experienced that in VR?
You know, it's funny. I feel like I have, but I haven't. But one thing I did see, James Nestor really early on was walking around with whales singing in VR, a mom and her baby. Did you ever see that?
No,
So you
I
were
don't
the
think so.
perspective of a diver, and you were not, embodying the motion, et cetera, but you were in a place that you couldn't have gotten to on your own. And that was amazing. Yeah, I think that counts.
Definitely. If you could do any form of dance that you haven't done before in VR, what would it be?
Oh, funny. Not a fast answer. I mean, I think that there's something about VR helping us do the physically slightly impossible for our own bodies, and how that imprints us and changes what we think our potential is. The same way that, the first time you ever do a handstand in yoga, there's that, okay, now anything's possible. And I do think, so for me, even though it's not my preferred kind of dance, I think some of the stuff that's more virtuosic to embody that would be really interesting. Yeah.
For me, it's breakdancing.
Well, that counts as virtuosic. I'm thinking Baryshnikov leaps, but I'll take breakdancing. Yeah.
Baryshnikov leaps would be great.
Yeah.
Or Tyler Peck pirouettes in a row.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
I'm glad to know you and to have witnessed and embodied your work in the past, and to see where it's grown to and how it's reaching thousands of people now.
Thank you. And likewise. I do want to say one more thing. I think that that's something that's very special about the immersive space. And it reminds me of early days as an independent filmmaker, where you really could call anyone, try anything. People were giving and open and learning from each other. And the best stuff happens when that's the case. So it's special.
True. Yeah. It's a special place.
Yeah.
More people will meet us there.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Thank you for entering the portal with me. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the next stage of storytelling, like and subscribe so that you can catch all of our episodes. If you're ready for more, jump through the portal into the next episode. If you've got a vision for your own immersive production, partner with Double I Studios and bring the future of storytelling to life today. May you stay curious, open, and embrace the future. I'll see you at the next act.